What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. So today I was thinking about all of the new and upcoming teams in the SEC West, and that got me to thinking, if teams like Arkansas and Ole Miss and others are on the rise in the West, then someone's going to have to take a step back to make room for all of that newfound success from what would traditionally be more lower level programs in that division. And I think I know, after thinking about it, who that team might end up being, and it's the Auburn Tigers. And now, before everybody comes in here with a bunch of hate, just hear me out. Everybody just calm down for a minute and hear me out. I'm not saying Auburn's in a situation where they're going to be terrible all of a sudden, or that they're going to be the next Vanderbilt or anything like that. All I'm saying is that I think that the days of expecting Auburn to compete for an SEC title year in and year out are likely over, at least for now and the foreseeable future. So why do I think that? Well, you have to start by looking at the other teams in the West right now. Alabama and Texas A&M are obviously on a much better trajectory than Auburn currently, and I don't think anybody can even really begin to argue about that. Although Texas A&M is kind of new to this level of hype and success, they have out-recruited Auburn in the recent years, especially this year. They've outperformed them on the field. They had a really good last year with some ups and some downs despite injuries, and they have a lot of expectations and hype going into next year and beyond with Jimbo Fisher. At this point, I feel like it's very easy to say Jimbo Fisher is a much more proven and much better head coach than Brian Harsin has been so far by a pretty wide margin. The next West team for me to look at is LSU, and because they're in a somewhat similar position to Auburn with a new head coach coming in, although Auburn Harsin will be in his second year, whereas Kelly will be in his first year. It is somewhat similar because they've been sort of down years the last couple of years, similar to Auburn has, compared to their normal status there. LSU hired Brian Kelly, though, and that to me is the big difference here, because despite what you may think about Brian Kelly as a person or, with his weird antics and accents and things like that, he is an outstanding hire. I mean, he is an absolutely amazing football coach. Yeah, he hasn't won the big game or anything with Notre Dame, but he's been recruiting at a huge disadvantage in Notre Dame due to academics. He hasn't been in a conference, and he's proven to be a very good head coach. And you've already started to see that play out with LSU. With their roster overhaul, they've done pretty well through the portal so far. They're also doing good on the recruiting trail. He's put together a pretty elite staff down there. And while Auburn may be a better team than LSU next season due to immense roster turnover at LSU, which even that remains to be seen, there's a very good chance that LSU is just as good, if not better, than Auburn next year even. But even if Auburn is better than them next year, going forward, LSU is most likely going to out-recruit Auburn. They will likely outplay them on the field because of that and due to superior coaching that they have in Brian Kelly. LSU also is just kind of a bigger brand than Auburn, and I'm not trying to hate on Auburn right now, but LSU has won more national titles. They've won them more recently, at least. And, they've had a national championship with Nick Saban in the 2000s, and then with Les Miles in the 2000s, and then even Coach O got one in the 2000s. There's sort of a mystique around LSU that I feel like Auburn doesn't quite have. And like I said, I think Brian Kelly is going to prove to be a very good head coach there. He's already proven that he's a very good head coach, and I think that he'll have LSU right back to where they would traditionally be, which is the 1A to Bama in the West. Pretty soon, A&M may have something to say about that. But regardless, I feel like they're going to be slightly above Auburn going forward, if not noticeably above Auburn going forward. This brings me to the next SEC West programs I want to look at, and that's Arkansas and Ole Miss. Arkansas is currently looking like a potential juggernaut going forward with how well they're recruiting and hitting the portal, in addition to how well they've played this past season and the season before that too, really, under Sam Pittman. Which is a weird thing to say that Arkansas looks like a potential juggernaut. Arkansas hasn't been that in forever, as long as I can remember, really. They've had good years, obviously, but not really the kind of hype and long-term momentum that they're building right now. And they're really the biggest new riser to the SEC West. Not that they're new to the division, but their success level is definitely a little bit higher than is standard for them. And especially when they went through a stretch of 4 or 5 really bad years, they're really turning that around. I have an entire video on that with them. They overachieved last year. They look to be even better this year and probably for many more years to come. They have passed Auburn already. as far as on-field play and performance, and it looks like Sam Pittman is doing a much better job at building his program than Brian Harsin is, and that's not really a shot at Harsin as much as it is a compliment to Sam Pittman and how well they're doing there. Then you have Ole Miss. Ole Miss also, they're similar but slightly different because they too are on the rise and they overachieved last season, but it was largely due to Matt Corral. However, Lane Kiffin has proven to be an elite offensive mind. He always puts out high-level offenses. He's turning into a high-level recruiter and head coach as well. He's putting together good staffs for the most part. If he can land a quarterback in the portal, which it seems pretty likely that he will, or will at least do everything he can to, even if they don't, they have some pretty good quarterbacks on roster, but they are expected to get one out of the portal. Then Ole Miss would be a pretty comparable team to Auburn already right now. You could argue that because of their coaching with Lane Kiffin and the way their offense is going to play, even if they're not a better team than them in a vacuum, on the field they would be a bad matchup for a lot of people. And like I said, if they can figure out quarterback, Ole Miss is always dangerous. I mean, they made a New Year's Six Bowl this year with Matt Corral. If they can get another good quarterback in there, they could do the same kind of thing. They will likely be a better team than Auburn next season. Until I see what they do at quarterback, I'm not going to be as confident in that as I am with Arkansas. And even if they aren't, though, that's not really the point. Ole Miss isn't always going to be a better program than Auburn, most likely, unless Lane Kiffin continues to build upon his success. But that's not, like I said, that's not the point. The point is they're on equal footing with Auburn at worst, and that isn't good news for Auburn. Auburn has always been a tier above the Ole Misses of the SEC and of the world, and they're not really anymore. Ole Miss has caught up to them. They are at very least on equal footing or close to it. You could argue that they're above Auburn right now. And that's bad news for Auburn. And that leaves Mississippi State as the only other team there in the West. And I do still consider Auburn to be above Mississippi State, but it's not like it's by a wide margin. Mississippi State outplayed them this past season in particular. I think as a program, Auburn is still above Mississippi State. They still out-recruit Mississippi State. And Mike Leach is always such a wild card. Mississippi State will upset teams they shouldn't beat and then lose to teams they should beat. It's really hard to predict anything with them. And so I'm going to assume Auburn will be a somewhat better team than them going forward consistently. But used to, they were a noticeably better team than Mississippi State. Mississippi State didn't really have near the same level of success or consistency as Auburn did year in, year out. Even under Gus Malzahn. And now Mississippi State, like I said, they just had a better season than Auburn. They are at a comparable level to them, and as a program at this point, I think Auburn is above them. But Mississippi State is a lot closer to them. That gap is not widening in the way that Auburn would hope for it to. And I think that just goes to the overall point here, which is that even if some of the teams like Ole Miss and Mississippi State aren't above Auburn as programs right now, they're basically equal to them, or at least very close, and that didn't used to be the case. Auburn used to be a tier above a lot of those teams. It used to be a tier above Arkansas as well. Arkansas is now past Auburn at this point. Texas A&M and Alabama are well ahead of Auburn right now. LSU will likely get back ahead of Auburn. They're currently kind of even with them, but it seems like they're already on a much better trajectory and path than Auburn, especially long-term, not necessarily just next season, but going forward long-term. And that's not good for them. It leaves them in a very tough situation as they're going to play in the best division in college football, and having a few down seasons in that division at the same time that the rest of the division is climbing and on the rise, that could have really big long-term implications, because you could go from a down season to where normally that level of a down season for a different team in a different conference would mean they win 7 or 8 games, and instead it means you win 4 games because you're in the SEC West, or 5 games, or even things like that. But even winning 7 or 8 games for Auburn is considered a down year. I mean, they're coming off of a losing season, and that is considered a major down year for them. The problem is, I don't know if that's going to get a lot better anytime soon, which brings me to my next point, and that is Auburn themselves. Like I said, they're coming off of a down year. They just went 3-5 in conference play. They lost their bowl game. They went 6-7, and they lost their bowl game to a good Houston team, but still a group of 5 team nonetheless. And I understand Auburn had a lot of injuries. They had a lot of opt-outs. They had a lot of situations going on in that game, so I'm not going to hate on them for that by any means. It's just they did end the year with a losing season, which is never good enough in Auburn. You are never happy with 6-7 there. They did close off their recruiting class pretty strong in the early signing period. They haven't made a whole lot of portal noise. I mean, they lost Bo Nix. They kept Tank Bigsby. That's been their biggest acquisition, I guess. Not really, because they're just keeping him. But there was a lot of word that he was going to leave. To be fair, they did pick up Zach Calzada in the portal. They picked up a few other players in the portal. But Calzada and anybody else that they've added through the portal so far, none of them are like game-changing players. None of them are going to change the trajectory of the program by themselves or even collectively. And so I don't feel like they're making any big moves in the portal that are of significant note or anything like that. They also just fired members of their coaching staff mid-season last year. They've had multiple head-scratching coaching performances, although they had a few strong showings as well, especially the Alabama game. But the inconsistency was incredibly frustrating at best. Mike Bobo is gone now. They have a new offensive coordinator in. What is that going to look like? Nobody's really sure. There's some talk I've seen recently that Derek Mason could be leaving for a head coaching job at and regardless of if that is actually true or not, it's an example of the extreme unknown and uncertainty around the entire program right now, surrounding that entire program as a whole. Auburn also has no idea who its quarterback will be next year. Will it be TJ Finley, Zach Calzada, Robbie Ashford, Demetrius Davis, Holden Gariner? It could be anybody. I mean, they really don't know. Finley's been less than impressive in his time at Auburn so far. Calzada has honestly been somewhat uninspiring at Texas A&M, minus the one crazy upset win over Alabama. But there's a reason he's leaving that program, and it's not because he was too good for A&M. I assure you of that. He has kind of a low ceiling, to be honest, but he is experienced and would be a decent option. The other three guys I mentioned are all very young. They're all very talented. They have high ceilings and high potential, but they're very much unknown commodities right now. They don't really have a lot of playing experience, if any. And so the quarterback position is honestly wide open between a 5-man competition in Auburn. And that is honestly kind of crazy to have that many people in the running for your quarterback spot. But that is a good analogy of what this entire Auburn program is right now. There's so much unknown and uncertainty around them. There's so many rumors swirling. There's so much going kind of wrong for them. And so much that we just don't know what to make of yet. That it's very, very stressful for the fan base, I'm sure. There's rumors that Brian Harsin's unhappy. There's been rumors for months and weeks now that he was tempted to take other head coaching jobs and things like that. There's a lot of the fan base that is unhappy with Brian Harsin being there. A lot of people have a lack of faith in him long term. There are people questioning if he's a good fit in the SEC or not. A brand new offensive coordinator, like I said, is going to be leading the offense this year. An offense that is honestly going to be kind of lacking in talent, minus Tank Bigsby, and with an unknown quarterback, like I just mentioned. The point here is Auburn has so much uncertainty surrounding the entire program, from the coaching staff to the quarterback spot to the roster as a whole, that there's no telling how good or bad they're going to be next year. But it is pretty safe to say they're going to be worse than Alabama, Texas A&M, Arkansas, and Ole Miss next season in all likelihood. LSU could end up being better than them. Mississippi State won't be much behind them, to be honest. Auburn could be in for another losing season next year with their schedule. I mean, they do have 3 essentially guaranteed out-of-conference wins next season, but they also will play Penn State out of conference, who they lost to last year. Mind you, they were at Penn State. This year they will be in Auburn. Regardless, that's going to be a very close game and certainly one that can go either way. It's not one you can just chalk up to a win. Out of the East, they draw Georgia and Missouri. They're almost certainly going to lose to Georgia in Athens, although I expect them to be a little bit better than Missouri, so they could maybe go 1-1 through the East. But other than that, in the West, there's no guaranteed wins. The Missouri game is not a guaranteed win by any means either. Penn State's not a guaranteed win. They're only going to probably be favored in maybe 1 or 2 of their SEC West games, probably be favored over Missouri as well. Might be favored over Penn State because they're at home, but I really don't know. It's just really hard for me to see a path where Auburn is going to be a true competitor in the West next season, which is a far cry from the expectations that this program has for that entire football team. I could easily see Auburn having another 6-7 year, or even a little bit worse, and they could do better and go 8-4 or 9-3. But when that is the good end of an Auburn football season, the program's definitely taking a step back. Used to 8-4, 9-3 was the down year. Now 8-4, 9-3 would be an outstanding season for Auburn this year. and I don't feel like that's a good sign for Auburn going forward as a program. I really don't see it getting much better for them in the future either, at least the near future. I mean, let's just say that they do outperform both Mississippi schools in the future, which isn't a given at this point with how those schools are performing, but let's just assume that they do. They're still likely going to hover around the 4th or 5th spot in their own division for the most years, behind Texas A&M, Alabama, Arkansas, and LSU. And even if they have a good season and they say they outperform Arkansas and LSU or Arkansas and A&M or something like that going forward, they're still going to be 3rd in their own division, maybe 2nd if they have an outstanding year. But for the most part, you can expect them to hover around 3rd or 4th on good years in their own division. That doesn't even mention having to deal with Georgia every year out of the East, who's in a much, much better position than Auburn as a program right now. Auburn fans aren't going to be happy with this kind of performance, to say the least. But unless Brian Harsin surprises everybody, starts recruiting at a much higher level, the same level as the Georgias, the A&Ms, the Alabamas, and developing talent as well as those schools are right now as well, while also fending off the up-and-comers like Ole Miss and Arkansas, dealing with the LSU team that could be a real juggernaut if they get things going the right way, all within their own division too. And I really don't see any other future for them at this point. They're trending down right now at the worst possible time for an SEC West team to trend down, and that's when almost everybody else is trending up. This is why I say Auburn's in trouble, and I mean it long term too, not just for next season. I honestly don't see a clear path where they consistently compete for the SEC and therefore the playoff going forward in this current SEC climate. And then when you add Oklahoma and Texas in the future, it's likely only going to make things worse for them. Because Oklahoma and Texas are both at least Auburn's equal currently. You could definitely argue both of them are currently superior or will be, especially Oklahoma, but Texas has got things rolling as well on their own end right now with Sarkisian. And so the point of that is that, at least in my opinion, the future of this Auburn program is looking kind of bleak. There is extreme uncertainty around them, and that is not a good thing for Auburn, obviously. And I don't see it getting much better in the near future. But with all that being said, this is just my opinion about the Auburn program going forward, and I could end up being completely wrong about Auburn and then completely shock the world next season and beyond. Let me know down below in the comment section what you guys think about it, what you think about this Auburn program going forward. If you disagree with me, explain why you disagree with me and what kind of future you see for Auburn in next season and beyond. Also, if you've made it this far in the video, go ahead and leave a like on the video because it helps out the channel tremendously. And subscribe to the channel for more college football content like this in the future, as I will continue to upload as regularly as my schedule allows. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.